The bathroom mirror in my cramped Brooklyn studio reflected a version of myself I barely recognized. 22 years old, and tonight marked a milestone I'd stopped believing would ever happen. My first real date in 3 years. The emerald cocktail dress I'd found at a Park Slope consignment shop for $60 hugged curves I usually buried beneath oversized cardigans and research materials. Mary Collins, the girl who'd spent 5 years since her grandmother's death drowning in art history archives and museum internships that paid nothing, was finally taking a chance on something that wasn't academic. Graham Whitmore had been persistent for weeks. Confident smiles in graduate seminars, thoughtful questions about my thesis on pre-Raphaelite symbolism, coffee shop conversations that felt more like connection than coincidence. When he'd asked me to dinner at Crimson and Gold, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, I'd been stunned. Men like Graham, tech entrepreneur, Columbia MBA, effortlessly charismatic, didn't usually notice women like me. Women who survived on ramen and library vending machines, who counted every subway swipe twice, who hadn't owned anything this elegant until tonight. The taxi ride from Brooklyn to the Upper East Side felt like crossing into another dimension. My reflection in the darkened window showed a stranger wearing borrowed confidence, clutching a vintage clutch that contained everything I owned. $18.47. I'd counted it twice before leaving, each count accompanied by a silent prayer that somehow it would stretch to cover whatever this evening demanded. Manhattan's Friday night energy crackled around me as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Executives in $1,000 suits swept past, their conversations peppered with casual references to weekend estates and European vacations that represented more wealth than I'd seen in my lifetime. The closer I got to Crimson and Gold, the more I questioned Graham's invitation. What could he possibly see in the scholarship orphan, who wore the same 3 outfits in rotation and spent Friday nights alone with dead artists' letters? The restaurant materialized from the evening darkness like something out of a Gothic novel. Not the warm, golden glow of typical Manhattan establishments, but something older, more deliberate. Crimson velvet curtains framed windows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Gold fixtures caught candlelight in ways that made shadows dance. And the patrons visible through those windows moved with a grace that seemed almost choreographed, their beauty too perfect, their stillness too complete. I didn't know this night would destroy every truth I'd built my existence on. I didn't know the platinum-haired man in the corner booth had been watching me for 8 months. I didn't know my blood carried secrets that made me worth more than diamonds to creatures who'd learned to hunt in darkness centuries before I was born. And I certainly didn't know that by dawn, I'd have to choose between the fragile mortality I'd always known and an immortal king who would promise to burn the world itself to keep me safe. "Table for 2, I told the hostess, my voice steadier than the thundering in my chest. "Reservation under Whitmore." She consulted her leather-bound book with practiced indifference, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the pages. Her assessment of me was swift and surgical. Consignment dress, drugstore makeup, nervous energy that screamed of someone drowning in waters far too deep. "Right this way, miss." The interior of Crimson and Gold defied every expectation. Where I'd anticipated the bright, bustling energy of Manhattan's dining scene, I found something that felt carved from an earlier century. Crimson velvet lined the walls like dried blood. Gold chandeliers dripped with crystals that caught candlelight and threw it back in fractured patterns. The air itself tasted different, expensive wine and something metallic I couldn't identify, mixed with fresh roses and old stone. But it was the other diners who made my skin prickle with inexplicable awareness. Every couple, every solitary patron dining in shadowed booths possessed a beauty that felt wrong somehow. Too symmetrical. Too flawless. Men and women who could have been 30 or 50, their ages impossible to determine, their movements liquid and precise. They spoke in low murmurs that seemed to carry across the space despite the volume, and when they laughed, the sound felt performative, as though they were mimicking human joy rather than experiencing it. The table overlooked the main dining area, positioned for maximum visibility. I slid into the velvet chair, hyper-aware of every glance from patrons who seemed to belong in this world of casual extravagance and beautiful danger. The menu's prices made my stomach clench with fresh anxiety. $45 for the cheapest appetizer. $70 for pasta. $120 for steak. My $18 suddenly felt microscopic, a child's allowance in a playground for titans. 8:15 became 8:30. 8:30 stretched toward 9 o'clock. Around me, couples shared wine the color of fresh blood, their conversations a steady hum of contentment I'd never quite learned to access. I checked my phone obsessively, refreshing messages that never materialized, dialing Graham's number only to reach voicemail decorated with his confident, charming voice promising he'd call back soon. The excitement I'd felt getting ready, the trembling hands applying mascara, the nervous practice of walking in heels I'd borrowed from my neighbor, transformed into something colder, sharper. Humiliation mixed with genuine concern, though I couldn't articulate which emotion was winning. Had something happened to him? Or had this been some elaborate joke I was too naive to see coming? Will you be ordering this evening, or are we waiting for your companion? The waiter's tone carried just enough condescension to make heat flood my cheeks. His eyes, an unusual amber color that seemed to catch the candlelight, assessed my modest dress, my discount shoes, my obvious discomfort with surgical precision. Behind his professional smile lurked impatience and something else. Hunger, perhaps, though for what I couldn't name. "He's just running late," I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "Could I just get some water for now?" The waiter's smile sharpened into something that resembled winter glass, beautiful and cutting. "Of course. I'll give you a few more minutes." But minutes became an eternity. Other diners glanced my way with mixtures of pity and predatory curiosity I didn't understand. The couple at the neighboring table whispered behind manicured hands, their conversation punctuated by sidelong looks that made my skin crawl with embarrassment. One of them, a woman with black hair and skin like porcelain, smiled at me with teeth that seemed too white, too sharp in the candlelight. I counted the money in my clutch again, as if repetition might multiply it through sheer desperation. $18.47. Not enough for water, probably. Definitely not enough to maintain the pretense that I belonged in this temple of wealth and strangeness. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Graham, and relief flooded through me so powerfully I nearly gasped. "Mary, I'm so sorry. Family emergency. Can't make it tonight. Rain check?" The casualness of it, the complete absence of real apology, the breezy assumption I'd understand, hit me like ice water. No explanation of what emergency. No acknowledgement that he'd left me stranded at one of Manhattan's most expensive restaurants. Just rain check, as though this were a cancelled coffee date rather than public humiliation. My hands trembled as I stared at the message, humiliation curdling into something darker. Rage, maybe, or the terrible understanding that I'd been foolish enough to believe someone like Graham Whitmore would actually want someone like me. The waiter returned, his patience visibly strained. "Miss, I'm going to need you to order something or vacate the table. We have a waiting list." "I'll take care of this." The voice came from behind me, low and controlled, carrying an authority that made the waiter step back instinctively. The sound wrapped around me like silk, commanding attention without demanding it, and the entire restaurant seemed to pause in its rhythm, every conversation faltering for just a heartbeat. I turned to find a man standing beside the table, and the air itself seemed to shift in his presence. Tall, easily 6'3", with platinum blonde hair swept back from a face that belonged in pre-Raphaelite paintings I'd studied for years. Pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight. Eyes the color of winter storms, silver gray and ancient, holding knowledge that made my academic expertise feel like kindergarten finger painting. He wore a white suit tailored with such precision it seemed sewn directly onto his lean, powerful frame. Every line of him spoke of old money and older power, the kind of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves to accommodate him. But it was his face that stopped my breath. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, a strong jaw, and an intensity in those silver eyes that made me feel exposed despite being fully clothed. When he moved, it was with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened, paths cleared, the world itself bending to accommodate his passage. "Sir, this is a private matter," the waiter began, but his protest died under the stranger's gaze. "No," the man said, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's not." He placed a black credit card on the table without looking at it, the gesture casual but definitive. "Cover whatever she wants. Add 30% for your trouble. And next time someone sits alone in your restaurant for 45 minutes, you bring them bread and wine without the attitude. Are we clear?" The transformation in the waiter's demeanor was instantaneous and complete. His spine straightened, professional courtesy replacing condescension with startling speed, and something else flickered in his amber eyes. Recognition. Fear. Respect bordering on worship. "Of course, sir. Right away. My apologies for any. Go." The single word carried such command that the waiter practically fled, and I was left staring at this beautiful stranger who just intervened in my humiliation with the authority of someone accustomed to reshaping reality with his voice alone. He slid into Graham's abandoned chair with liquid grace, and up close, his presence was even more overwhelming. He smelled of cedar and something indefinable, old libraries and winter nights and dangerous promises. His hands, folded calmly on the table, bore no wedding ring but displayed a heavy signet ring on his right hand, old gold etched with symbols I didn't recognize. "You didn't have to do that," I managed, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. His lips curved in what might have been amusement, though his eyes remained serious, assessing. "No one humiliates a woman in my city without answering to me. Especially not a woman brave enough to wait alone for someone who clearly doesn't deserve her time." The way he said, "my city," made something flutter low in my chest, not quite fear, not quite attraction, but something that combined both into a cocktail more intoxicating than anything on Crimson and Gold's menu. "How do you know I was waiting for someone?" I asked, proud that my voice had stopped trembling. Instead of answering immediately, he gestured toward my phone, still clutched in my hand, Graham's dismissive text glowing on the screen. "May I?" Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to gather whatever dignity remained and flee this strange restaurant with its two beautiful patrons and this stranger whose attention felt like standing in a spotlight designed to reveal every secret I'd ever kept. But something in his eyes, curiosity mixed with something that looked almost like concern, made me slide the phone across the white tablecloth. His fingers brushed mine as he took it, and the contact sent electricity racing up my arm, brief but undeniable. He read Graham's message with practiced efficiency, but I caught the subtle tightening around his mouth, the way his jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. When he looked up, his expression had hardened into something that belonged in boardrooms where life-changing decisions were made with casual cruelty. "Graham Whitmore. Tech entrepreneur. Columbia MBA program. Family money from Seattle." He paused, those silver eyes holding mine. "Recently developed very expensive, very dangerous habits." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process not just the information but the casual way he delivered it, as though reciting facts from a dossier he'd memorized. "How do you know Graham? How do you know any of that?" His smile revealed a hint of teeth that seemed slightly too sharp in the candlelight. "In my line of work, information is currency. And right now, you're sitting in the middle of a transaction you don't understand." "What transaction? What are you talking about?" Before he could answer, my hand trembled, residual adrenaline from humiliation and confusion, and knocked against my wine glass. The crystal stem caught my palm, and a small, sharp edge I hadn't noticed opened a cut across my lifeline. A single drop of blood welled up, bright red against my pale skin. The stranger's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His nostrils flared. Those silver-gray eyes darkened to something closer to black, pupils dilating until the color almost disappeared. Supernatural hunger flooded his beautiful face, transforming it from merely striking to something predatory and ancient and terrifying. He grabbed my wrist with inhuman speed. one moment sitting calmly, the next holding me with fingers that felt like marble, cool and impossibly strong, and stared at the blood drop as though it contained answers to questions he'd been asking for centuries. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice rough with shock and something that sounded like awe. "Lumina. After all these centuries." He released me abruptly, visibly struggling to regain the control he'd worn like armor moments before. His hands shook slightly as he pulled back, and the restaurant's atmosphere shifted like a storm front moving through. Every patron in crimson and gold turned to look at us, dozens of too beautiful faces, all focused on my bleeding palm with identical expressions of hunger barely contained. They stood as one, moving closer with predatory interest that made my survival instincts scream warnings I didn't understand. The woman with porcelain skin and two sharp teeth smiled wider. A man in an expensive suit licked his lips. Another woman's eyes had gone completely black, just like the stranger's. The beautiful man beside me stood with liquid grace, placing himself between me and the approaching patrons. When he spoke, his voice carried such command that it seemed to vibrate in my chest. "Mine." The single word stopped them all mid-step, as though he'd erected an invisible wall they couldn't cross. Fear and respect warred in their two perfect faces, and slowly, reluctantly, they retreated to their tables, though their attention never left me. The stranger turned back to me, and his expression had shifted into something complicated. Concern and hunger and calculation all mixed into an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "We're leaving," he said, offering his hand. "Now. Before they decide to test whether I meant it." "Before who decides?" "What's happening?" My voice came out steadier than I felt, academic curiosity warring with genuine terror. "Who are you people?" His smile held no warmth, only ancient knowledge and beautiful danger. "The real question, Mary Collins, is what are you? And why does your blood smell like salvation and destruction all mixed into one impossibly rare gift?" He knew my name. He knew what I was before I did. And as I took his hand, cool marble fingers closing around mine with surprising gentleness, I realized that Graham's abandonment had been the least of tonight's catastrophes. The way this stranger looked at me, like I was simultaneously the most precious and most dangerous thing he'd encountered in a very long time, told me that whatever normal life I'd been clinging to had just shattered beyond repair. And the most terrifying part? Some dark, curious corner of my soul whispered that maybe normal had always been a lie I told myself to feel safe. "My name is James," he said as he led me toward the exit, every patron watching our departure with predatory fascination. "James the Great. And I'm the reason your date abandoned you tonight, because men like Graham Whitmore know better than to deliver prey to predators without permission." "Prey." The word came out as a whisper. His silver eyes met mine, and in their depths I saw centuries of hunger and restraint locked in eternal battle. "You have no idea how valuable you are, do you? How many creatures would kill entire bloodlines for a single taste of what runs through your veins?" The way James looked at me in that moment, like he could see every secret my blood carried, every ancestor who'd bled before me, made my skin prickle with a terror I couldn't name. I didn't know yet that some men don't just want you. They claim you. And once claimed by a creature who's walked this earth for over a millennium, there's no going back to the safe, ordinary life you thought you were building. If you're wondering whether I should have run that night, whether I should have refused his protection and his dark, beautiful promises, subscribe to find out why running would have killed me by dawn. Because the Nightfall Coven was already hunting me. And they don't stop until they drain you dry. The restaurant doors closed behind us, and my old life, the one where vampires existed only in novels and loneliness was my greatest threat, disappeared into the Manhattan night like smoke. The vintage Rolls-Royce waited at the curb like a predator in repose, all gleaming black metal and tinted windows that reflected the street without revealing what lay within. A driver stood beside it, unnaturally still in the way statues are still, and when his eyes met mine, I saw the same eerie perfection that had marked every patron in crimson and gold. This was Silas, though James didn't introduce him, and something about the driver's absolute motionlessness made my skin crawl with fresh unease. James guided me into the back seat with a hand at my elbow, his touch gentle despite the marble coolness of his skin. The interior smelled of leather and old money and something metallic I was beginning to associate with danger. As Manhattan blurred past the windows, James began explaining the impossible with the calm efficiency of someone discussing the weather. Vampire society has existed for millennia, he said, watching my face for reaction. Hidden among humanity's elite, controlling territories and resources, maintaining the balance between our world and yours. Manhattan is divided into courts, ancient bloodlines that have claimed their domains through centuries of negotiation and occasional war. Crimson and gold is neutral ground. Switzerland, if you will, where all courts can meet without bloodshed. I should have laughed. Should have demanded he let me out of this car immediately. But the memory of those two perfect faces, those hunger-darkened eyes, the way an entire restaurant had obeyed his single word, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. My blood, I whispered. You called it Lumina. What does that mean? James's expression grew serious, ancient knowledge settling over his features like a mask. Your blood is Lumina. A genetic rarity that appears once in several generations, maybe once in a century if we're unlucky. It can break vampire magical protections, shatter compulsions, strip away immunities we've spent millennia building. It's simultaneously the most powerful weapon against my kind and the most coveted resource in our world. The implications crashed over me like ice water. That's why they were staring. Why you? Why I looked at you like you were salvation and destruction mixed into one impossibly rare gift. Yes. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. Vampires would kill entire bloodlines to possess or destroy Lumina carriers. Your grandmother was Lumina. I knew her decades ago before you were born. Made her a promise to protect her line. Graham. The name tasted like betrayal on my tongue. He knew. That's why he... Graham Whitmore is a blood hunter, James cut in, his tone hardening with barely controlled rage. Human vermin who track supernatural targets for vampire patrons. The Nightfall Coven, my enemies, led by an 800-year-old monster named Isolde Morgrave, hired him 6 months ago to identify and seduce you. His interest in your thesis, his charm, every conversation you thought meant something? All calculated. Tonight's dinner was supposed to end with you drugged and delivered to Isolde's ritual chamber. Nausea rolled through me. The phone call? My people warning him to abort. He chose running over facing what I'd do to him for touching you. James's eyes flashed darker. A wise choice, though temporary. You've been watching me. The words came out flat, shock giving way to something colder. You knew about Graham. You knew I was in danger. How long? 8 months. No apology in his voice, just brutal honesty. I paid your grandmother's final hospital bills so you could finish college without drowning in debt. Ensured your graduate program, accepted you with full funding. Kept every vampire court in this city from learning about your bloodline. Your grandmother made me promise to keep her granddaughter safe. I've honored that promise. You've been controlling my entire life. The accusation exploded from me, anger burning through the fog of terror. I've been keeping you alive, he countered, his voice sharp as a blade. There's a difference. Take me home. Now. No. The single word carried such absolute authority that I fell silent, staring at him. James leaned forward slightly, silver eyes intense. The moment I claimed you in that restaurant, every vampire in Manhattan knows you're under my protection. But they also know you exist now. Your apartment isn't safe anymore. Nothing about your old life is safe. The Rolls-Royce pulled up to a Tribeca building that screamed old money and older secrets. James led me through a private entrance to an elevator that required a key, and we rose in silence to the top 3 floors, all his apparently. The penthouse that greeted us was a study in contrasts. ancient artifacts displayed beside modern luxury, priceless paintings on walls of exposed brick, a library filled with books spanning centuries of human history, and, I suspected, supernatural secrets. But it was the portrait that stopped my breath. Pre-Raphaelite style, oils that glowed with inner light, depicting a woman who could have been my twin. Same auburn hair, same bone structure, same green eyes that held both intelligence and vulnerability. Her name was Lillian, James said quietly from behind me. She was Lumina. She was everything. And she died 400 years ago because I couldn't protect her. The weight of those words settled over the room like a shroud. Before I could process, James moved with that inhuman speed, and suddenly he was across the room, then back, having retrieved a wine glass in the span of a heartbeat. His face transformed, fangs extending fully, eyes going completely black, the beautiful mask of humanity falling away to reveal the predator beneath. "I'm 1,247 years old," he said, his voice deeper, resonant with power. "I've ruled Manhattan's vampire court for 3 centuries, and I've never broken a promise to someone I've sworn to protect." He gestured, and his assistant, a young man I hadn't noticed entering, approached. James spoke a single word in a language I didn't recognize, and the man's eyes glazed over, his expression going blank. "You saw nothing tonight. You were never here." The assistant nodded and walked out, and I knew with absolute certainty he would remember none of this. "Stop," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "Please stop. I want to go home. I want my normal life back." James's face shifted back to human beauty, but the sorrow in his eyes remained ancient and terrible. "Your normal life was an illusion," I maintained. "Now that illusion is shattered. The Nightfall Coven will come for you, Mary. The only question is whether you'll let me teach you to survive." "Why me?" The question came out broken, desperate. "Why does any of this have to be real?" He moved closer, surprisingly gentle as he brushed a tear from my cheek with cool fingers. "Because some bloodlines carry power whether we want them to or not. And some of us spend centuries trying to protect what we've already lost once before." When James showed me the photographs he'd kept, 8 months of my life documented in secret, I should have been horrified. But all I felt was the terrible weight of being seen for the first time since my grandmother died. He knew about my Lumina blood before I did. Knew I'd be hunted. Knew I was never safe, even when I thought I was just another broke grad student eating ramen and analyzing dead painters' symbolism. The Nightfall Coven had been circling me for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Graham? He was their bait. Subscribe to see how deep this betrayal goes, because what Graham did to me in that restaurant was just the beginning of his deception. And the Coven's plan for my blood is worse than death. The door opened and Silas entered with the eerie silence of his kind. "My lord, we have a situation. The Nightfall Coven just sent a message." He handed James a velvet box, and dread coiled in my stomach as James opened it. Inside lay Graham's bloodied Columbia University ID badge and a note written in elegant script. James's face went completely still as he read, then handed me the note with controlled fury. "We know what she is. We know what she's worth. You have 72 hours to surrender her, or we take her by force. And we'll make sure you watch what we do to extract every drop of her precious blood before she dies. Isolde Moorgrave, Nightfall Coven." My hands trembled as the words blurred before my eyes. 72 hours until monsters came to drain me dry. And the only thing standing between me and that fate was a vampire king who looked at me like I was someone he'd already lost once before. I woke in a guest room that cost more than my yearly rent, silk sheets cool against my skin, morning light filtered through curtains that turned Manhattan's sunrise into something gentler. For one blissful moment, I thought last night had been a nightmare born of humiliation and too much stress. Then I saw the closet. It stood open, revealing rows of clothing in my exact size. Designer labels I recognized from museum galas I'd only attended as staff. Dresses, jeans, sweaters, all tasteful, all expensive, all perfectly curated to my style. The bathroom held luxury products I'd only seen in magazine advertisements, and the implications settled over me like a shroud. James hadn't just been watching me for 8 months. He'd been planning for this moment, preparing a cage made of silk and protection and control. The penthouse was silent in that way expensive spaces are silent, sound swallowed by thick carpets and solid walls. I found James's private study almost by accident, drawn by the scent of old books and older secrets. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held volumes spanning centuries, their spines cracked with use, and artifacts I suspected belonged in museums sat casually on mahogany tables. The portfolio lay on his desk, leather-bound and innocent-looking. My hands trembled as I opened it. Photographs. Dozens of them. Me leaving the Brooklyn Museum after my internship shift, afternoon sun catching my hair. Me on Columbia's campus absorbed in a textbook, completely unaware of being observed. Me in a coffee shop working on my thesis, biting my lip in concentration the way I did when wrestling with complex ideas. And one that made my breath catch, me kneeling at my grandmother's grave, face wet with tears I'd thought were private. I turned it over with shaking fingers. James's precise handwriting adorned the back. She mourns alone. Like Lillian did. I won't let history repeat. You weren't supposed to find those. His voice came from the doorway, no apology in the tone. I spun to face him, photographs scattering across the desk. You've been stalking me. Documenting my life like I'm some research project. This is protection, he cut in, moving into the room with that liquid grace. I told you I've been protecting you. This is what protection looks like when you're facing enemies who've existed for centuries. This is obsession. The accusation exploded from me, 8 months of violation crystallizing into rage. This is control. You're no different than the monsters hunting me. For the first time since I'd met him, genuine anger flashed across James's face. His eyes darkened not to full black but to storm cloud gray that promised violence barely contained. The monsters hunting you want to drain you slowly over days while they perform rituals with your blood. They want to hear you scream as they break you piece by piece. I want to keep you alive. If you can't see the difference, you're not as intelligent as your academic record suggests. The words hit like a slap, and something in my expression made him pause, run a hand through his platinum hair. When he spoke again, his voice had gentled slightly, though the intensity remained. Lillian was Lumina. A carrier in 1625 London, when I was only 400 years old and arrogant enough to believe my power could protect anyone I chose to protect. He moved to the window, staring out at Manhattan as though seeing another city entirely. A rival vampire court kidnapped her. Performed the Crimson Rite ritual, the same one Isolde wants to use on you. It drains Lumina blood to break magical protections, and it takes hours. Days if they're careful. By the time I found her, she'd been bled to death on a stone altar, and all I could do was hold her while she died. The pain in his voice was ancient and fresh all at once. She made me promise I'd never let another Lumina bloodline be destroyed. Your grandmother was her descendant, Mary. You are the last of Lillian's line. Understanding crashed over me like ice water. You don't see me. You see her. I'm just a replacement for someone you lost 400 years ago. When I first discovered you existed, yes. His honesty was brutal and somehow comforting. That's what you were, a promise to keep, a bloodline to protect. But these past 8 months watching you? The way you talk to yourself when you're researching, how you cry at paintings because you understand the artist's pain, your fierce independence even when you're barely surviving on ramen and library coffee? That became about you, Mary. Not her memory. Before I could respond, he continued with controlled urgency. Isolde Moregrave leads the Nightfall Coven. 800 years old territorial rival wants Manhattan for herself. The Crimson Rite using Lumina blood would destroy my protective magic over this city. Without those protections, Manhattan becomes a hunting ground for any vampire. Thousands of humans would die in the chaos. Your blood isn't just your life. It's the barrier between order and massacre. I have class today, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. My thesis defense is in 2 weeks. I'm not hiding in your gilded cage while you fight monsters. You can't be serious. You said I need to accept this as real. Part of that is maintaining some connection to my actual life. We compromised. 4 of James's people, vampires and human guys, he explained, would accompany me to Columbia's library. They'd stay close, invisible, ready. I'd do my research and pretend normalcy existed for a few more hours. The rare books section of Butler Library usually felt like sanctuary. Ancient texts, the smell of old paper and preservation chemicals, silence broken only by the scratch of pencils and turning pages. But something felt wrong the moment I settled at my usual table. The normal ambient noise of a university library, distant conversations, footsteps, the hum of ventilation, had disappeared into oppressive quiet. I looked up. The other students were gone. The lights seemed dimmer somehow, shadows pooling in corners where they shouldn't gather during daylight hours. The king's new pet Lumina. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, smooth as poisoned honey. Isolde will be so pleased. 3 figures materialized from shadows that had been empty seconds before. 2 beautiful faces, predatory grace, eyes already darkening with hunger. The one who'd spoken, tall, dark-haired, wearing expensive casual wear that made him look like any Columbia graduate student, smiled with teeth too sharp to be human. "I'm Thorn," he said conversationally. "And you're coming with us. The question is whether you cooperate or whether we make this painful." James's guards appeared with supernatural speed, and the library exploded into violence I could barely track. Bodies moving faster than human eyes could follow, furniture shattering, the crack of breaking bone mixing with inhuman snarls. I ran on pure instinct, but one of Isolde's vampires cut off my escape with liquid ease. "Just a taste before we take you," he whispered, backing me against the stacks, "to see what makes you so special." Then James was there, moving with speed that made the other vampires look slow. His hand punched through the vampire's chest, and I heard the wet sound of a heart being torn free. The creature's scream cut off as he disintegrated into ash that coated my skin, my clothes, my gasping mouth. James turned to me, face covered in blood, eyes pure black, every inch the apex predator. "Get behind me." I obeyed on trembling legs as his guards eliminated the remaining Nightfall vampires in a coordinated assault that left the rare books section looking like a war zone. Campus security arrived within minutes, their voices raised in confusion and alarm, but James spoke a single word that made their eyes glaze over. "Gas leak," he said, voice carrying compulsion that made reality bend. "Structural damage. Everyone evacuated safely. You'll file the appropriate reports and forget you saw anything unusual." They nodded and left, already pulling out phones to call maintenance, and I stood covered in vampire ash, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. "You wanted to go to class," James said quietly. "You wanted normal. This is why normal doesn't exist for you anymore." Back at the penthouse, everything I'd been holding together finally shattered. The supernatural world was real. I was hunted. My date had betrayed me. My entire life had been orchestrated by a vampire who looked at me like I was simultaneously precious and damned. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't process the reality that monsters existed and they wanted to drain me slowly while I screamed. James didn't try to comfort me with words. Instead, he said with brutal gentleness, "You want to hit something? Hit me. I'll survive it. You need to break something? Destroy this room. I'll replace everything. But you need to stop pretending you're going to wake up from this nightmare because you're not. This is real. And the faster you accept it, the faster we can keep you alive." The door opened and Silas entered with his usual eerie silence. "My lord, Graham Whitmore is here. He's demanding to speak with Miss Collins. Says he has information about the Nightfall Coven's plan that could save her life." Tell him I'll kill him before he gets through the door, James said, voice flat with barely controlled rage. No. The word surprised me as much as it surprised them. I want to hear what he has to say. I want to look him in the eye and understand why he did this. Mary, you said I need to accept this is real. Part of that is facing him. On my terms this time. James studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. On your terms. But I stay in the room. And if he makes one wrong move, I'll show you exactly what happens to blood hunters who touch what's mine. Graham Whitmore entered the penthouse like a man walking to his execution, and perhaps he was. Bruised shadows darkened his eyes, his designer clothes rumpled and stained, and his hands trembled as he clutched a UV flashlight like a talisman against the predator watching him with absolute stillness. Silver rings adorned every finger, vampire deterrents that would burn supernatural flesh on contact, and the desperate calculation in his movements spoke of someone who knew exactly how fragile the threat of his survival had become. James stood by the window, backlit by Manhattan's evening glow, radiating the kind of menace that made the air itself feel heavier. He hadn't moved since allowing Graham entry, but his presence filled the room like a promise of violence barely restrained. I'm sorry, Mary. Graham's voice cracked on my name. I never meant for it to go this far. How far did you mean it to go? I kept my voice level, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing how his betrayal had shattered something fundamental inside me. When you joined my graduate seminar? When you pretended to care about pre-Raphaelite symbolism? When you asked me to dinner? Blood hunting pays $500,000 per successful Lumina delivery. The confession spilled from him like poison draining from a wound. Isolde Moregrave's human operatives recruited me 6 months ago. They gave me your profile, orphaned, lonely, vulnerable, studied obscure art history. You were the perfect target, Mary. No family to ask questions. Isolated. Desperate for connection. Each word landed like a physical blow. So you calculated everything. The coincidental meeting. The shared interests. The slow courtship. I researched pre-Raphaelites for weeks to seem compatible, he admitted, and something in his expression suggested he wanted me to be impressed by his dedication. Joined your seminar specifically. Built trust over months. The restaurant was supposed to be the final step, drug your wine, deliver you to the cathedral, collect my money. But James's people warned you off, I said flatly. Graham's laugh was bitter. I didn't know what they'd do to you. I thought they just wanted your blood for experiments or something medical. Then I saw the ritual chamber. His face went pale with genuine horror. The crimson rite, Mary. They'd bind you to an ancient stone altar. Ceremonial knives would open your veins slowly, keeping you alive as long as possible while they drained you. 3 to 4 hours of bleeding out. You'd be conscious the entire time. Screaming. And there's nothing that could stop the pain. The clinical detail in his voice made bow rise in my throat. James moved fractionally closer, a predator sensing distress in his territory. Why are you here, Graham? I demanded. Guilt? Or is this another manipulation? Isolde moved up the timeline. She's performing the Crimson Rite in 48 hours, not 72. His words came faster now, desperate. And she has my sister. Took her this morning. If I don't deliver you by tomorrow midnight, she'll turn Rachel into a vampire and make her hunt children for food until I'm forced to watch her die. The name, Rachel, 16 years old, innocent of her brother's crimes, hung in the air like an accusation. You were going to let them torture me to death for money, I said, ice crystallizing around each syllable. And now you want me to save your sister? I know I don't deserve it. I know you should let her die. But she doesn't even know about any of this, Mary. She's innocent. No one is innocent who shares blood with a hunter, James said quietly, his first words since Graham entered. I ignored him. Where is Isolde keeping her? Graham's relief was palpable and disgusting. The Nightfall Coven's cathedral. Underground beneath the old St. Vincent's Hospital in the village. But you can't just walk in. It's warded against James's people. Hundreds of years of blood magic protecting it. Lumina blood breaks wards, James said, and understanding crashed over me like ice water. That's why she wants me at the cathedral specifically. The pieces click together with sickening clarity. My presence collapses the protections. You can enter, and she can perform the ritual simultaneously. She's planned this perfectly, James confirmed, his voice carrying centuries of strategic experience. Either you stay here and an innocent girl dies, or you go and deliver yourself directly into Isolde's hands. How much Lumina blood would it take to break the wards? I asked. Absolutely not. I know what you're thinking. If I go willingly and give her some blood to break the wards, you can get inside and save Rachel before the ritual completes. James moved with supernatural speed, suddenly close enough that I could feel the cool emanation of his presence. She won't stop at some blood. The moment she has you, she'll start the Crimson Rite. I'll be fighting through centuries-old vampires while you're being bled to death on that altar. There's something else. Graham's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Isolde said Lumina blood doesn't just break magic. It can transfer power. If she drains you during the ritual, she doesn't just destroy James's protections. She takes your bloodline's power for herself. Becomes immune to vampire weaknesses. Unkillable. James went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that preceded extreme violence. That's impossible. The Crimson Rite has never. She found Lillian's ritual notes. From 1625. She knows how you've been protecting Lumina bloodlines for centuries. She's been studying it for decades, waiting for another carrier to surface. The door burst open, and Silas entered with uncharacteristic urgency. My lord, we have a problem. Isolde just sent a live video feed. The screen flickered to life, showing a Gothic cathedral carved from stone that predated modern New York. A teenage girl, Rachel, with Graham's bone structure and terrified eyes, lay bound to an altar stained dark with centuries of blood. And standing over her with a ceremonial blade that caught torchlight like captured fire was the most beautiful and terrible woman I'd ever seen. Isolde Morgrave looked perhaps 30, with midnight hair and skin like marble and eyes that held 800 years of calculated cruelty. When she spoke, her voice carried through the speakers with aristocratic precision. Hello, James the Great. And hello, sweet Mary. I'm sure Graham has delivered my message by now. But just so we understand each other, this is what happens to blood that isn't Lumina when I get impatient. The blade descended with surgical precision, opening Rachel's arm. Blood flowed into the ceremonial basin while the girl's screams echoed through the cathedral, raw and primal and helpless. You have until midnight tomorrow, Isolde continued, her smile sharp as broken glass. Bring me the Lumina girl, or I'll turn this child and make her massacre her whole family. And Mary? I know you're watching. I know you're kind. That's what makes you so easy to trap. See you soon, darling. The screen went black, but Rachel's screams continued echoing in my mind. I'm going, I said quietly. Mary. I'm going because if I don't, you'll watch another innocent person die because of Lumina blood. And this time you won't be able to tell yourself it's not your fault. You'll know you could have sent me and chose not to. Just like Lillian. The words hit James like a physical blow, devastation flickering across his ancient features. That's not fair. None of this is fair. But I'm done being the thing everyone fights over. I'm making my own choice. Even if it kills me. 24 hours passed in a blur of strategic planning and combat preparation that felt surreal against the backdrop of my academic life crumbling into irrelevance. James's strategy was brutally simple. I would surrender myself to break the wards, and the moment those protections shattered, he'd lead 30 of his court's warriors in a full assault. My job was to stay alive long enough for rescue, a task that sounded deceptively simple until James began teaching me vampire anatomy with clinical precision. "Heart, decapitation, or fire," he said, demonstrating on diagrams that looked medieval in their detailed brutality. "Nothing else will kill us permanently. Anything else we heal." He pressed a silver blade into my hands, the metal cold and deadly. "Hide this in your dress. If it comes down to it, you take as many of them with you as you can." The night before the assault, sleep proved impossible. I found James on the penthouse balcony overlooking Manhattan, a king surveying his kingdom with the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders. "I've ruled this city for 300 years, he said without turning. "Made impossible decisions. Sacrificed people I cared about for the greater good. But sending you into that cathedral is the hardest thing I've ever done. You're not sending me. I'm choosing to go. That somehow makes it worse." His voice carried pain I hadn't heard before. "Why? Why does it make it worse?" He turned to face me, and for the first time since we'd met, he looked genuinely vulnerable. "Because Lillian didn't choose to be taken. She was a victim. You're walking into danger with your eyes open, and I can't protect you from your own courage." We moved closer, the tension between us electric and inevitable. His hand rose to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. "If you survive this," he whispered, "I'll never let you out of my sight again." Is that a threat or a promise? Both. The space between us disappeared to nothing, his cool breath mixing with my warm one, and for a heartbeat I thought he'd kiss me. But James pulled away with visible effort, pain flickering across his features. "Not like this. Not when you might not survive the night. When this is over, when you're safe, I'll give you the choice I should have given you from the beginning. To stay or leave. To remain human or become something else. To accept me or walk away. But only when you're truly free to choose." Midnight found us beneath the ruins of St. Vincent's Hospital, descending into a cathedral that predated Manhattan itself. Gothic architecture carved from living stone, blood-red stained glass that caught torchlight and threw it back in patterns that hurt to see, and the weight of centuries of dark rituals embedded in the very walls. The air tasted of old blood and older magic, and my survival instincts screamed warnings I forced myself to ignore. Isolde Morgrave waited like a queen on her throne, 800 years of terrible beauty wrapped in ceremonial robes the color of dried blood. Rachel lay bound to one altar, unconscious but breathing, while 40 vampires of the Nightfall Coven watched with predatory anticipation. The Lumina girl, finally. Isolde's smile was sharp as broken glass. And so beautifully compliant. James must be losing his edge in his old age. "Let the girl go. You have me. That's what you wanted." What I wanted was to see the great James the Great brought low. And here you are, proof that even kings have weaknesses. Isolde moved with supernatural grace, and the ceremonial blade opened my palm before I could flinch. Blood welled up, and when it hit the cathedral floor, the ancient wards shattered with a sound like breaking glass that resonated in my bones. Magic that had protected this place for centuries dissolved, and I felt it like a physical wound. "Oh, that's delicious," Isolde breathed, inhaling deeply. "Do you feel it, Mary? Your blood singing to the stones? This place was built for your kind. Built to drain you." She bound me to the second altar with practiced efficiency, and her smile widened. "I think I'll do you both. The Lumina for power. The innocent for fun." The cathedral doors exploded inward with force that sent stone shards flying. James entered like vengeance incarnate, 30 vampires at his back, and the battle that erupted moved at speeds my human eyes could barely track. Supernatural violence filled the space, bodies moving faster than thought, the crack of breaking bone, inhuman snarls mixing with screams. James fought toward me with single-minded determination while Isolde began the crimson rite. The ceremonial blade opened my arm, and pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced flooded my nervous system. Lumina blood burned differently, like fire in my veins, like every ancestor who died this way screaming through my DNA. Did you know, Isolde said conversationally over my screams, that Lillian didn't actually die from the ritual? She survived it. James found her alive. What? The word came out strangled. Oh, he didn't tell you? Lillian survived the draining. But she was changed. The Crimson Rite didn't just take her blood, it took her soul. She became something neither human nor vampire. A hollow thing. And James killed her himself. A mercy killing. Because she begged him to end her suffering. Mary, don't listen to her. James's voice cut through the chaos, closer now. Is it true? His hesitation was answer enough. Yes. I killed Lillian because the ritual destroyed everything she was. I won't let that happen to you. How touching. Isolde laughed. But you're too late. Again. Through the haze of pain, I remembered James's lessons. Remembered the silver blade hidden in my dress. Used the last of my strength and the slickness of my own blood to slip the bindings, grabbed the ceremonial knife from Isolde's altar and staggered toward Rachel. Run! I gasped, cutting her free. Lying on that stone altar with Isolde Morgrave's fangs in my throat, feeling my Lumina blood drain into the Crimson Rite basin, I understood what James had been trying to tell me all along. Some fates are worse than death. The ritual wasn't just about breaking his protections. It was about erasing me, turning my bloodline into a weapon, my existence into fuel for their war. Every ancestor who carried this gift, every woman who came before me, had died screaming in places like this. James killed Isolde to stop it. But saving my life meant offering me a choice no human should ever face. Subscribe to witness the transformation, because what happened when I accepted James's bite changed everything I thought I knew about power, love, and what it means to survive the darkness. You stupid girl. Isolde's rage was magnificent and terrible. You've ruined centuries of planning. She attacked with supernatural speed, but I swung the blade in desperate defense. The silver bit into her flesh, and my Lumina blood coating the metal made it burn like acid. Isolde's scream shattered the air as James reached us, tackling her with brutal efficiency. The fight between two ancient vampires was poetry and violence intertwined, perfectly matched until James grabbed my blood-covered blade and drove it through Isolde's heart. This is for Lillian, he said quietly. And for every Lumina bloodline you've destroyed. Isolde disintegrated to ash, and the battle ended as her coven fled or died. But I was collapsing, blood loss dragging me toward darkness. James caught me, and his voice held desperate urgency. Stay with me. Stay with me, Mary. I can't. I can feel it. I'm dying. You don't have to die. His silver eyes held mine with terrible intensity. I can turn you. One bite, my blood in your veins, and you'll survive this. But you'll be vampire. Immortal. You'll never see daylight again. Never be fully human. You'll crave blood for the rest of eternity. But you'll live. What if I become like Lillian? Hollow. The Crimson Rite did that to her. This is different. This is my choice to give you freely. Not a ritual. Not a weapon. Just a chance. Will it hurt? Yes. Transformation is agony. But you'll survive it. And when you wake, you'll be stronger than anything that's ever hunted you. Do it, I whispered. I choose to live. Even if it means becoming a monster. You're not a monster. You never were. His fangs pierced my throat, and pain exploded through every nerve ending, fire and ice and electricity all at once. My heart stopped, then restarted beating to a different rhythm. My senses sharpened until I could hear every heartbeat in the cathedral, smell blood from impossible distances. When my eyes opened, the world had transformed into something sharper, clearer, more alive than I'd ever imagined. Fangs descended for the first time, and my voice emerged deeper, more powerful. I can hear everything. Welcome to eternity, James said softly. I looked at my hands, stronger, faster, different. What have I become? Someone who'll never be prey again. Someone who chose power over safety. Someone who's mine if you'll have me. I think I became yours the moment you paid for my wine. Our kiss tasted of blood and ash and forever, two vampires in a cathedral of death choosing life together. Graham appeared with Rachel in his arms, and my new instincts marked him as prey. You're right, I said coldly. You don't deserve anything but death. Mary, we exile him, James said gently. That's punishment enough. He sold me for money. And mercy is what separates us from monsters like Isolde. Even when we're vampires, we choose what we become. I met Graham's terrified eyes. Fine. Exile. But if I ever see you again, mercy won't be on the table. 6 months had transformed me in ways that went far beyond fangs and immortality. I stood in James's penthouse watching the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of gold and crimson, the last light I could safely see before darkness claimed the city as my kingdom. The elegant black dress I wore had been tailored to accommodate the swell of my belly, and my hair had grown longer, framing a face that held both the softness I'd carried as human and the predatory edge that came with becoming something more. Queen of James's Court. The title still felt surreal, yet I wore it with the same careful precision I'd once applied to analyzing pre-Raphaelite symbolism. My days, or rather my nights, were filled with authenticating stolen supernatural artifacts, negotiating treaties with vampire courts across the eastern seaboard, and learning to navigate immortal politics with the analytical mind that had served me so well in academia. The pregnancy was impossible and real all at once. Damper children were rare, born only in the first year after transformation when the body still remembered what it meant to create life. My hand rested on the bump beneath expensive fabric, feeling the flutter of movement that James monitored with protective intensity bordering on obsession. The first damper birth in New York in 2 centuries, and every vampire court from Boston to Miami watched with predatory interest. The Hunters Guild representative sat across from me in James's war room, his weathered face carefully neutral despite the fear I could smell rolling off him in waves. We're proposing a ceasefire, he said, fingers drumming nervously on the table. Stop hunting vampires in Manhattan, and you leave our territories untouched. Your operatives killed 3 fledgling vampires last month, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger simmering beneath. Children turned against their will who were learning to control their hunger under their sire's guidance. You murdered them in cold blood. They were monsters. They were children. I leaned forward, letting him see the silver glow in my eyes. And now their sires want war. I'm offering you an alternative. Acknowledge that not all vampires are threats and will help you hunt the ones who are. The rogues. The killers. The ones even we can't control. The database I'd created over 6 months cataloged vampire types, threat levels, behavioral patterns, statistical analysis applied to immortal problems. Turns out analyzing vampire behavior patterns wasn't much different from analyzing dead painters' symbolism. They all followed predictable narratives, and I'd become invaluable to James's rule by bringing human analytical thinking to challenges that had confounded immortals for centuries. Silas entered with his characteristic silence. My lady, we have a situation. Graham Whitmore has been spotted in the city. He's with a group of hunters. We believe they're planning to attack. My eyes flashed silver, predatory instincts awakening with sharp clarity. I told him what would happen if he came back. We should capture him, James said carefully. Find out what he knows about the hunters' plans. No. We should kill him. He's a liability and a traitor. He'll always be a liability. James studied me with concern that felt centuries old. You've become harder in these 6 months. I've become practical. You taught me that. I taught you to survive, not to become cruel. There's no difference anymore, I countered. Survival requires cruelty sometimes. You know that better than anyone. I also know that holding on to humanity while being vampire is what makes us worth loving. His hand covered mine on my belly. Don't lose yourself to the power, Mary. But I insisted on confronting Graham personally, tracking him to an abandoned warehouse in Red Hook where he stood surrounded by 5 hunters armed with UV lights and silver weapons. When he saw me, terror and defiance warred in his expression. I came back to finish what I started, he said, voice shaking. To kill the monster you've become. I'm not the monster. I moved with supernatural speed, dodging the silver bullets he fired with desperate precision. I'm what survives monsters. I had him by the throat before he could reload, my fangs extended, every instinct screaming to end the man who'd sold me for $500,000. I should make you feel what I felt in that cathedral. Let you understand what it means to be prey. Then why haven't you done it yet? He gasped. The answer crystallized with painful clarity. I released him, stepping back as my new nature warred with the human I'd been. Because James was right. Mercy is what separates us from monsters. Even when we're vampires, we choose what we become. I don't understand. Why let me live? Because killing you would be easy. It would feel good. And I refuse to become someone who kills because it feels good. I leaned closer, letting him see the predator behind the mercy. So instead, you're going to carry a message to the Hunters Guild. Tell them that Queen Mary of the New York court offers one chance at peace. Work with us to eliminate rogue vampires, and we'll stop treating all hunters as enemies. But attack my people again, attack my family, and there won't be mercy. There will be war. And this time vampires won't hide in shadows. We'll remind humanity why they used to fear the dark. They'll never agree to that. Then you'll all die. And I'll make sure you die last so you can watch everyone you care about suffer first. Now run. Before I change my mind about mercy. Graham fled and James approached with something that might have been pride in his ancient eyes. You let him go. Because our child is going to ask someday what kind of people we are. And I want to be able to say we chose mercy when we could have chosen revenge. Even if it was harder. 6 months ago I was Mary Collins, lonely, ordinary, human. Tonight I'm standing in James's war room planning the future of supernatural politics in North America. I can hear heartbeats from 3 buildings away. Smell fear like copper pennies on my tongue. And I'm carrying a damper child, half vampire, half the Lumina bloodline that once made me prey. The irony isn't lost on me. The blood they wanted to drain and destroy is now mine to wield. James taught me that power isn't about what you're born with. It's about what you're willing to become to protect it. Subscribe to see what I've become, and what I'll do to anyone who threatens my family. Because the girl who cried at that restaurant table? She's dead. And I'm what rose from her ashes. At dawn, we stood on the penthouse balcony behind UV-protected glass, watching the sun rise over our city. My hand rested on my pregnant belly, James's hand covered mine. Do you think Lillian would have made the same choices I have? I asked. Lillian never got the chance to choose. You did. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you you. I used to be so afraid of becoming a monster. Now I am one. And the strangest part is, I've never felt more human. Because humanity isn't about mortality. It's about choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. You're more human as a vampire than most mortals ever are. What happens next? We raise our child. We build a court worthy of the power we hold. We protect the Lumina bloodlines that still exist. And we make sure no one, human or vampire, ever hurts our family again. Sounds like eternity. It is. Are you ready for it? I've been ready since the night you paid for my wine. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The Hunters Guild accepts your proposal. But there are conditions. And there are other things in this world besides vampires. Things that are coming for you. Things that want your damper child. Be ready. A friend in the guild. James read it over my shoulder. It seems peace was too much to hope for. I smiled, fangs visible, eyes silver with predatory anticipation. Good. I was getting bored anyway. The queen of the night, ready for whatever comes next.